All right, welcome back to Swamp Speak. I'm Josh Chernovoy. We're glad to be back, along with Allison Benko.
Hi, everybody.
And Greg Luca.
How's it going?
A lot has happened since our first episode, including the end of the NCAA tournament and the Gator baseball teams right in the midst of their home stretch. Or not quite their home stretch, but they are getting right through non-conference play and coming up on SEC play. We're first going to talk about Gator basketball, though. They came to the end of their season last weekend, had a very unfortunate loss, eerily reminiscent of theirs in the Elite Eight in 2011. So we're first going to dive into that. Greg, being someone that covered the team last year and really kind of saw that loss in New Orleans up close, I was there too. What kind of jumped out to you about this one, aside from the fact that at the end of the game, it was just a collapse, kind of just like last year?
Well, I think on paper it was very similar. Blowing an 11-point lead in the last 9 minutes is very much exactly what happened against Butler, and it's the same thing that happened when they played Louisville. But I think the way it happened was a lot different, and Billy Donovan said after the game it's totally different from what happened in the Butler game, because I think in that game they gave up a lot of offensive rebounds and a lot of loose balls, and those kind of things led to Butler's comeback. And against Louisville, it seemed like just Louisville made a ton of tough shots, and all the shots that Florida was making in the first half, when they shot something like 60%, they were doing so well. It just didn't fall down for them in the second.
They were definitely on fire in the first half, but the fact is they can't expect to shoot 60-something% every single half. What did they have to do? What should they have done to adjust that they didn't quite do heading into the second half?
Well, I mean, they could have changed some things in terms of going inside more, I think. When Louisville switched to their man-to-man defense from the zone that they shot over in the first half, it got really tough for Florida to get open looks for three. So the natural response would be to go inside to Patrick Young and Eric Murphy more, who had both had pretty good games inside, but they only had like one shot attempt between them over the final 8 minutes when Louisville made their comeback. So that was something that was mentioned after the game that they could have done more of, and something they really abandoned when it counted the most.
That was something I kind of thought was similar to last year's game, too. They were both very effective. I think it was one shot, or I think neither of them attempted a field goal in the final 6 minutes and 55 seconds. And last year, at the end of the game, Vernon Macklin was kind of taking over the game for the Gators. I think he ended up with something like 25 points.
Yeah,
but he ended up being on the bench at the end of the game because Billy Donovan didn't want him on the free throw line, but even though he had kind of been the most dominating player in the game to that point. So it was definitely a couple things that kind of probably left a sour taste in Gator fans' mouth, but the fact is this team did still make the Elite Eight. Allison, based on their expectations at the start of the season, do you think Gator fans should still be happy even though they were that close to the Final Four and didn't make it? Should they be satisfied with this run?
Oh, definitely. I think that the thing that's unique about Florida fans is that once we get into a championship, they're all gung-ho. But all season, the support wasn't there. Wouldn't you agree, Greg, that there wasn't much belief in this team from the fans?
I think a lot of people just didn't think, given like the inside players and not having the three that were there last year with Chandler Parsons and Alex Tyus and Vernon Macklin, they just felt it was a totally different group and didn't really trust that they had the inside scoring that would get them where they needed to be. And yeah, I think for that reason it unsurprised a lot of people. I mean, you see a 7 seed make it to the Elite Eight, that's something in and of itself.
I had this discussion with a couple of friends earlier this week as far as ranking this year among Billy Donovan's coaching jobs since he's been at Florida. Yeah, they didn't win a championship like they did in 2006 and 2007, but considering that they lost their whole front court, Chandler Parsons, Alex Tyus, Vernon Macklin, to be able to replace all those guys and then make a run like this, what I thought was the most impressive was that the fact is he just had to go with a very different type of lineup than he did last year and still really coach them up. When you look at playing someone like a 6'9 Chandler Parsons, 6'10", whatever he exactly is, at the 3 last year, then going to playing Brad Beal, who's a great player in his own right, but just not quite the same size. It's a very different looking lineup, and he was still really able to coach him up. What can you say about how Billy Donovan did this year as opposed to last year, Greg?
I think it was a great effort from him, and even though people are going to say he took this team to the Elite Eight, but he had the team, on the brink of the Final Four, and I mean, if they were close with Kentucky twice that they played them before, the other game was obviously a blowout, but I think, if they ended up playing Kentucky in the Final Four, maybe they could have been looking at a national title somewhere in there. So, yeah, definitely one of his better jobs to do this with such a small lineup and be able to get the guards and Kenny Boynton and Irving Walker, and especially Brad Beal to actually grab some rebounds as much as they needed to keep up with last year's totals. Yeah, it's a very impressive job from Billy Donovan.
Now, Greg, you said you were up there for the last game, correct?
I was not in Phoenix.
You were not? Okay. Did you hear anything about, I saw on Twitter it was blowing up about the environment of that locker room after the loss. Did you hear anything about that?
Yeah, and from what I heard, it's a lot like it was in New Orleans after they lost to Butler. It's just always so rough when they come that far and they put that much time into it, and then for For some people, their career's over. For everybody else, the season's over, and you kind of have to start from scratch. So, especially for Irving Walker, a guy that was kind of fighting back tears in his locker. They said he had a towel over his face and didn't really do a whole lot in terms of interviews and stuff, which is understandable. So, yeah, definitely a rough environment. The worst part of this job, for sure, is having to do this end of the season stuff.
And you mentioned careers being over. We know that's the fact for Irving Walker, but as far as the Gator careers of Brad Beal and Patrick Young, a couple guys people think may or may not jump to the NBA, based on what you saw from them down the stretch, Greg, I think we all agree that Brad Beal is definitely talented enough to go. Patrick Young has enough potential to be a great NBA player, but will and should these guys go?
I think Patrick Young should go, not because I think he'll be successful, but because I think he's going to hurt his stock even more if he comes back for another year. Like, after his freshman season, he was supposed to be a top 10 pick, and now he's, like, near the end of the first round, going down, and, if he comes back and keeps playing the way he's playing right now, which isn't bad, but isn't great, he could find himself, in the second round where your contract isn't guaranteed, and I think if he left now, just on potential alone, it would be enough to draft him late in the first round, but if you come back and give all the scouts and all the coaches in the NBA one more season of bad game film, I don't think that helps you stay on that level, and your potential, they're going to be worried that you're not reaching it rather than how much you actually have. As for Beal, I think he's gone. I think he's going to be maybe a top 5 pick, at worst top 10, and I think he's easily the best guard in this draft class, and I don't see why he would come back to play out of position for another season, because he's going to be a 2 guard in the NBA, and he's playing small forward here, so there's no reason he wouldn't just make that jump, because the things he's going to do here next year aren't going to help him as much at the next level.
Yeah, and probably in the next couple weeks we should know what these guys' answers are. That deadline to declare for the NBA draft is coming up, so maybe on episode 3 of Swamp Seek we'll be able to kind of break down what next year's Gator basketball team is going to look like based on the recruiting class, based on the players they have returning. But I do want to switch over to Gator baseball. They had a big 4-1 win last night in Jacksonville against Florida State. Allison, you were at that game. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw from the Gators? They've had a lot of success against FSU in Gainesville, but this is pretty big for them to get a win in a neutral site against FSU, because they had struggled against them in recent years anywhere but Gainesville.
Yeah, that's right. At home, Sully's been very, very successful against FSU, but when they take it to Jacksonville, the Gators haven't won a game against FSU there since 2007. So yesterday's game really did break that streak, and Sully was definitely very pleased with that outcome yesterday.
And talk a little bit about their pitching, because we knew coming into the season that their weekend rotation was going to be really strong. They had Hudson Randall returning. They had Carson Whitson, Brian Johnson returning. Carson Whitson's been out of the equation, but they seem like they've had a lot of success in these midweek games, kind of going with whatever bullpen pieces they feel like throwing out there. Greg Larson with a really good start last night. Talk about just how the rest of this rotation has stepped up whenever they need someone to take that fourth starter spot.
Right. Well, the bullpen this year is absolutely outstanding. The depth is incredible. What Sully's doing is essentially doing a chess match, essentially lining up each pitcher to the weaknesses on the other team from the scouting reports. Last night they threw in Johnny Magliozzi, who's a freshman, for only 6 pitches, and he did his job, and then they switched him out and kind of tailored it to the next batter. Sully's definitely playing smart here.
All right, well, Greg, kind of looking at this lineup right now, we talked about before the show a little bit how Casey Turgeon stepped up. Can you talk just a little bit about just this? They had some injuries in this lineup in the outfield and then kind of at third base with Josh Tobias. Just how, in spite of these injuries, they have been able to still produce offensively.
Well, I think what's interesting, you talk about the injury, and the biggest one I think was Tyler Thompson in center with the ACL, so he's going to be done for the year. And I think it's been impressive what they've been able to do without him, aside from the fielding where they've had some struggles and they've made a few errors out there. And he was clearly the best center fielder and the best outfielder that they have defensively. But I think they're going to be fine on the offensive side. We saw Bikash Ramjet was moved into the starting lineup last night and had 2 hits. So I think he's proven, he played a little bit towards the end of last season. He's proven that he can do some things offensively for them. So I don't see that being too much of a letdown for them.
All right, well, that's about all the time we have for today on Swamp Speak. Next time, stay tuned for probably some more Gator baseball talk. Maybe even a little lacrosse. I don't know. Maybe we'll be able to look forward I don't know. Maybe we'll be able to look forward to next basketball season. But we got to go right now. Thank you very much for listening. For Allison Benko and Greg Luca, I'm Josh Chernovoy. Stay tuned for more Swamp Speak to come.